and for some of the other major international Jewish investment banks. So even the guy who was translating for Marina Oswald, telling, the Warren Commission and telling the Dallas police what she had to say, right. This is a guy who's connected to the Bronfmans. And the guy who ran the Citizens Council in Dallas was connected to the Bronfmans. And Jack Ruby was connected to the Bronfmans.
Okay. Let me just, I was trying to emphasize the Russian Jewish factor, okay?
Yes, it's there.
Because that's how I jumped to 9/11.
Okay.
Because we call the neocons Trotskyites, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I really believe, the more I learn, I believe Russian, think about the plot. We tried to blame it on Russia. That's what Oswald, that's
exactly right.
Okay? Now, I really believe that it was Russian specifically. I'm being specific here.
Okay.
Specifically, very specifically, Russian, Jewish, Ukrainian, Poland, immigrate. That's where I'm placing the blame for it, okay?
Trotskyites? Well,
and today we call them Trotskyites.
Neoconservatives.
Neoconservatives.
Pro-Israel.
That blood vein, for lack of a better word, is still running strong.
Listen, I want to tell you something. This gets even deeper. If you start looking into Lee Harvey Oswald's travels in Russia...
I don't want to look into Lee Harvey Oswald.
Well, let me tell you, though, what's very, very interesting is the people that were involved with Lee Harvey Oswald in Russia, they were not your Russian communists. They were Jewish Trotskyites who were believed to be U.S. spies. This is another area. Again, this is where they would have a link into Lee Harvey Oswald to know who he was, right, to manipulate him.
Exactly.
So listen, I want to tell you something. You are very much moving in the correct direction there. Well, listen, I'll tell you what, Bob. I want to bring up some of these callers. They may be able to give us some further information. Let's go to Jim, who's been very patient.
Hello, Michael.
Yes. How are you, Jim?
Good. And how are you tonight?
All right.
Well, it's kind of interesting you're getting into this because you mentioned a lot about this in your book, Final Judgment, about media manipulation,
mm-hmm,
especially in suppressing the conspiracy theory. And I was watching this show. I don't know if you've heard of Mad TV.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's aired on. We get it on Chicago's Fox network, and then reruns are aired on Comedy Central every day.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And sometime after your book was released, probably in the late 90s, they had a segment on it where they were doing a skit where they have a bunch of little kids they're teaching things to, and they got onto the JFK assassination and then mentioned conspiracy theory. Well, with doing it, of course, they were just tearing the whole thing up, making it look ridiculous.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
And that there's no better way to get to the human mind than comedy.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right? As much
Make
as
fun
any
of people.
Program.
Mm-hmm.
And it just struck me as funny. I'm not sure who owns that network or produces that show, but obviously it's a very Zionist-dominated
well, Fox is owned. I hate to tell you, Fox is Rupert Murdoch's the big man up front, but I want to tell you who financed Rupert Murdoch in part, the Bronfman family.
Okay, that makes sense.
That name Bronfman keeps popping up here.
Right. You've mentioned it a few times now, and I did understand even Murdoch was partly Jewish extraction.
There's actually some question about that. I don't know where to come down on that. Some people I know say he is, some people say he isn't, so I don't know what to say, but it really doesn't matter because he's working for the Zionist interest.
Well, yeah, nonetheless, it doesn't matter. He's serving them.
Right.
And, a couple other things. I did hear of people warning, at least a couple of them warning JFK to stay out of Dallas, and it was very hostile to him and his family, which is kind of,
Well, that's all the more reason, you see, that's all the more reason why to pull it off in a place like Dallas, because They wanted it to be, number one, in an area that they controlled, which they did through this Citizens Council. But more importantly, the public image of Dallas was that it was right-wing crazies, Christians, WASPs, Texas oil men.
They wanted you to have that image of
That's
it.
the image they were portraying Dallas as being, even like the Hollywood series that was on television for years. That was the whole image. Cowboys, just like the image they did of Enron, cowboys. But as I wrote in my book, The New Jerusalem, Enron was founded essentially by a New York Jewish family, the Belfors.
That's right. Okay. Is that a relation to Arthur Balfour?
No, this is Belfer, B-E-L-F-E-R, that Belfer. And Balfour himself was not even Jewish, the guy who did the Balfour Declaration.
Is that right? He was a British man? Or
what's that?
He was British or something?
He was not. The Belfer family, though, who got the Enron thing going, and Mr. Belfer actually was on the board, the executive board of Enron, the whole time that Ken Lay was pulling off all these shenanigans. Don't tell me that Mr. Belfer didn't know about this.
No, I'm sure, and it's all funny the way these things fit in. I can remember. This is strange. As I thought about this later, the way that whole thing went down with Ruby approaching Oswald, it seems strange to me that he got up that close without being restrained at some point before that. That years ago, I remember going up in the area of Bannockburn, Illinois on Half-Day Road, and there was this big caravan of limousines coming towards me, taking up both lanes of the highway. You know, and they're hitting their horns, and I'm kind of bewildered because I'd never been encountered with this. I didn't know what was going on. Well, just common sense told me to pull off to the shoulder. After they cleared, a Bannockburn policeman went up to me and said, you know, it's a good thing you got off when you did, because they were going to run you right off the road. They were escorting George Bush back to the airport. And, you know, you think about it, how could anyone believe that wasn't staged the way they just allowed him to go up and plug him like that?
Well, that was, you know, and there's very solid evidence to suggest that Ruby himself didn't want to do it. He was making phone calls to numbers of people who recognized his voice after the fact. He was saying, hey, be careful, they're going to try to hit Oswald. What he was trying to do was set himself up so that he wouldn't have to do it, so that he couldn't get through. But then it was so big, but then there was no real protection, so he had to do it. So it was a setup. It was a setup, and that's what it was intended to be. Listen, you know, Jim, I want to try to squeeze one more caller in here while we have the time, so I'd like to move on, but I appreciate your call. Yes. Let's go to Randall. Randall, are you still there?
I would like to say that... Are y'all still with me?
I'm here. Are you there?
Oh, yeah. I thought we were off.
No.
Yeah, well, see, I read the Jim Garrison's book on the trail of the assassin.
Right.
And, of course, that's the Oliver Stone movie. You know, according to him, it seems as though that it was the CIA that murdered Kennedy.
Well, all right, I'll tell you what. Jim Garrison looked into it very, very deeply, but I'll tell you what, as I point out in Final Judgment, Jim Garrison was circulating a manuscript for a novel about the JFK assassination in the 1970s. And you know who he blamed in that novel?
No telling.
The Mossad.
That was funny. Well, I'll tell you, you know...
See, what happened was Garrison, and even that book, now let me tell you something about Garrison's book.
Sure.
I don't think that he would have ever said the Mossad publicly, even in that particular book, because this is funny, or sad, or something, or interesting. That book that Garrison wrote was published by a company that was associated with people who were actually receiving money from the Stern Family Fund, the Stern family of New Orleans, who were associates of Clay Shaw.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that book was... Garrison's book was very heavily edited before it was published.
Yeah,
but in his unpublished manuscript, the novel, he blamed the Mossad. So Garrison had obviously come across a lot of things in his own research that led him in that direction.
Wouldn't a person...
I'm sorry I never got to talk to Garrison before he died.
Right. Well, wouldn't a person have to be absolute nuts if we didn't have anything else other than the Zapruder film to go on to think that Oswald was a lone assassin, especially when you saw the whole side of his head being blown out from the opposite direction the bullet was coming from.
Well, you know, I'll tell you something. There's so much debate over the Zapruder film. Now, you know, Jim Fetzer, who has a program on this network, thinks the Zapruder film that we know today is actually it's hard to explain this. He can do it far better than I can, and it's a very interesting explanation he has for it, but he suggests that maybe what we see today of the Zapruder film, now this may be an inaccurate representation of what he says, but it's as close to the way I can explain it, that film is actually a spliced-together version of possibly 2 films, maybe even 3 films that were taken from the same general area. So the question about the Zapruder film in the real picture is irrelevant because we know there were so many lies told. What we need to find out is who did it and why. Listen, Randall, thank you for your call. When we come back, Bob and I are going to wrap up the hour. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Michael Collins Piper here, wrapping up this hour. To remind you, beginning on Monday, we are going to start broadcasting for 1 hour, as before, 1 hour from 8 p.m. Eastern Time to 9. 8 to 9 Eastern Time, 7 to 8 Central Time, if I've got that correctly. 8 to 9 Eastern Time, 7 to 8 Central Time, and those of you in Mountain and Central will have to figure out those hours for yourselves. Anyway, we've been talking about the JFK assassination here with Bob, and as I said, on Tuesday night, I'm going to pursue this further, and Bob, you're welcome to call back then if you want, because I know we're going to have a lot of people who want to add things, argue some points, and so forth. But, Bob, I'm going to give you the last couple minutes here tonight just to say what you have to say, because you came at this on your own, and I came at it on my own, but here we fall together on the same page.
Well, first I want to say thank you for taking the risk to let me speak. I know I'm a hard person to listen to.
Not really.
Okay, and I really, and I'm just a normal person who decided to investigate it, and that's what I came up with. But I really do believe a few things, and one of them is I believe that the Kennedy assassination shows us the DNA of a false flag operation. A false flag operation is like a black hole. Nobody's ever seen one. We think they exist. We think we can see the effects of them. We're not really sure, but we think, but we've never seen one. Well, I think the Kennedy assassination is the DNA of what a false flag operation looks like. And
but let me say something, Bob. I hate to interrupt you, but in my book, Final Judgment, you use the term black hole.
Yes.
Well, I actually have a chart in the book in which I contend that the Kennedy assassination is kind of like a black hole. The further you go into that black hole, on the front you see Lee Harvey Oswald, and then you see the Ku Klux Klan and the Texas Oil Men and the right-wingers.
That's if you follow. Remember, you got 3 cases. If you follow the Kennedy path, you end up in a black hole.
Well, you keep pushing further. When you get to the end of that tunnel, you see the reality.
If you follow the Ruby path, you do not end up in a black hole. And finally, I would like to say that I think Ray McGovern was a CIA agent during the Kennedy administration.
He may have been. I don't know.
Well, according to his bio, and I was wondering maybe you can get him on the show sometime if he's willing to talk about it.
Well, I tell you, a lot of people who know these things, they don't want to get into realms of that because it's considered conspiracy theory, and he takes on some pretty powerful interests as it is with what he's doing now, and I think he's probably more content to, stick with what he is sticking with and not getting into other realms. I've come across that with other people.
Anyway, based on that DNA, I believe, I think I now believe that, I more formally believe that